Hello, welcome to Microfiche Microphone. I'm Micah, and on this channel we look at microfiche from the past, old newspaper articles in the public domain. We look at them with our modern eyes, our modern perspective, and see what we can learn from them. On this microfiche time capsule, we are looking back at the improvement era from December 1931. And this article is entitled Greatness in Men, President Charles W. Nibley, by Bryant S. Hinckley, President of Liberty Stake. So the author is Gordon B. Hinckley's father. But also I think this is interesting because Bryant S. Hinckley did this whole series of Greatness in Men and highlighted different leaders of the church. And I thought that would be fun to go through. But however, the last one we read was a bit more about the person's character than about his life. So I will also be doing some fact checking at the end and see if we can get some more information about things that he did as opposed to what he is like as a person. But I personally find what person is like kind of more interesting, although what they do can also be very interesting depending on who the person is and what it was that they had done. So Charles W. Nibley, if I'm not mistaken, was presiding bishop, I think. Let me just look that up really quick because I don't want to, give wrong information. Hang on, just in case you're wondering, I'm going to my own website. It looks like he was in the first presidency, so let me just go to his page. Yeah, he was okay, thank you. I'm glad I remembered that correctly. He was presiding bishop from 1907 until 1925 when he was called to as second counselor in the first presidency. Okay, I feel better now. I was like, I swear he was presiding bishop. Why does it say president instead of bishop? Yeah. Anyways, that's why. So here we go. So this one is in 1931. This is shortly before his death, which was in December of that year. So this is like just before his death. So this one should be fairly thorough if they go through his, anything about his life. They're not going to be missing a whole lot of details. So I'll also be showing the pictures. This first one is, like cut out of a picture and it's a little bit too smooth. I would have said it was photoshopped except for the fact that they didn't have Photoshop back then, nor did they have digital photos, nor did they have computers for that matter. So, not like we use today. So there's no way that was Photoshop. That was cut out by hand and placed on a copy machine. President Charles W. Nibley, a Scotch lad, comes to America, herds sheep on the hills of Cache Valley where he memorizes Shakespeare, climbs the rough roads to success financially, socially, and best of all spiritually. Among his numerous friends was one especially beloved, Joseph F. Smith, former president of the LDS Church. I didn't know any of those details. Interesting. Okay, it sounds like we're going to get some good information about this person. Wow. Awesome. A friend of Joseph F. Smith, huh? At far west Missouri, in the turbulent days of persecution, Joseph F. Smith was born, a man whose influence and companionship have meant more to Charles W. Nibley than any other person in the world, except his heroic Scotch mother and members of his own family. In September 1848, with his widowed mother and other courageous souls, Joseph F. Smith came to Utah, a boy 10 years of age. 19 years after, he was made an apostle, age of 29, and went to Cache Valley, where for the second time President Nibley, then a Scotch lad of 18 years of age, met him. A friendship was established between these men which continued to grow stronger and brighter until death separated them. Okay, so Joseph F. Smith was a bit older than him then, yeah? It was a fortunate thing for any man to know intimately Joseph F. Smith. He possessed a solidarity of character and an unconquerable heart. President Smith was the kind of man whose friends would die for him, for they knew that he would be true unto death. He loved Charles W. Nibley with all the strength and fervor of his great heart, and this love was returned to him in full measure, and thus was built up a friendship that was deep and enduring and beautiful. To know intimately either of these men is to think better of mankind. Well, so far we know more about Joseph F. Smith than we do about Charles W. Nibley, though, except that his parents were Scottish. Anyway, thrift, caution, and economy are the national characteristics of the sturdy people of Scotland. Also doesn't say anything about this person, though. Many humorous references are made to their caution in giving, but that little land has given to the world more than its full share of genius and of greatness. Congratulations, Scotland. Once again, this is not about this person. That's a bit frustrating, Bryant Hinckley. Geesh. But there are few individuals from any land who have made a better contribution to the church of their choice than the wise and devoted Scotch bishop, now President, Charles W. Nibley. His parents were of humble extraction but of sterling worth. As is frequently the case, their distinguished son received his best inheritance from his mother. His sagacity and enterprise, the strength of his character, the brilliancy of his mind, his spirit of adventure, his indomitable courage were all distinctly manifest in her life and character. And here's a picture of her. Yeah. Our admiration for this good woman rises with every difficult situation in which this family finds itself. She was a shining example of those puritanic virtues which underlie all successful colonization and which permeate the lives of men and women who constitute the backbone of the world. No wonder her son cherishes with reverent pride her memory, for she was indeed an extraordinary woman. So, then the captions of here's the rest of the photos plus the captions. The first one says, President Nibley's mother, Jean Wilson Nibley. Yeah. Center, the Nibley home in Scotland. Here's this one. It's very blurry. It's difficult to see. Looks like it's made out of stone. And lower, President Nibley's father, James Nibley. He doesn't look that much like his parents. It's a little interesting. Maybe a little like his father. Strange. Charles W. Nibley is a man of large vision and courage, with a rare capacity for bringing things to pass. This, coupled with a keen sense of values and sound business judgment, enabled him to rise rapidly in the world. Alone, without prestige or fervor, he fought his way from abject poverty to affluence and power. No man prominently identified with his church has displayed superior capacity for successfully carrying forward large projects. While he has been a conspicuous leader in the industrial and financial world, he has never slackened in his allegiance to the church, and all his life he has been a prayerful, thoroughgoing Latter-day Saint. The proof of his early poverty is graphically set down in his reminiscences, which will be cherished legacy to his posterity. At the time referred to here, the family was living in Wellsville, Utah, and he was about 12 years old. Our breakfast were the scantiest kind, says he, a little wheat porridge without much milk, and a little of the brown or black bread without butter. In the morning I was furnished a piece of bread for my dinner, as I would start off on the hills with the cows, but my dinner was devoured before I got half a mile away from our camp, and I had to go hungry until evening. About the only clothing I had at that time was a pair of pants made from the tent which we used in crossing the plains, and which had grown so stiff and hard, being weather-beaten in so many storms, and a shirt made of the same material that when it touched my back or sides it nearly took the skin off. But it was the best I had, and all I had. A rope tied around my waist was used to hold my pants up and my shirt down. I can remember that when I was hungry at dinner time, about the only thing I could do to help my stomach was to tighten my rope. Why does that sound really familiar? I feel like I've heard this story before. Maybe I've just heard the story without knowing that it was about this person. I've definitely heard the story before. Interesting. Yeah, I mean, that's poverty, all right. But, like, they were crossing the plains. A lot of people back then had nothing. Like, it was a really rough time for many, many people. But can you imagine wearing clothing made out of tent canvas? Like, that's such a rough fabric. Like, it would definitely irritate your skin. No wonder he didn't like it. I mean, who would? Feature that boy, clothed as he was, fed as he was, the home in which he lived, much of the time without shoes, without a coat until he was 16 years of age. That's very late. Gosh, and they lived in Utah. I mean, it snows there. And see him 30 years later, confident, prosperous, recognized, giving employment in mills, factories, and on railroads to thousands of happy workmen. There is a path which leads from the lowliest depths to the loftiest heights. His feet have pressed that path. Well, for sure he didn't have any advantages. That's crazy. Not every poor boy can do what he did, but every boy can draw inspiration and encouragement from the story of his achievement and resolve that he will not be the victim of his environment. No matter how hard or lowly his circumstances may be, opportunity is calling to him, and there is work for him to do if he will only get ready. In that humble pioneer home in Wellsville, the living may have been scant and the comforts may have been very few. But in Jean Nibley's home, no matter how poor, There was never any of the squalor or wretchedness which sometimes manifests itself in poverty. Charles W. Nibley certainly had what S. McClure said he hoped to bequeath to his children, the advantages of poverty. What advantages? I'm sorry, that pisses me off. As someone who grew up with almost nothing, you don't have advantages of poverty. The fact that you rose above it is very impressive, but if you had started a little higher with a little more support, then you wouldn't have had to deal with all that you had to deal with. I'm sorry, I hate that. Advantages of poverty, I'm sorry. There's a couple more pictures, so let's take a look at them while I calm down. So, Charles Wilson Nibley at the age of 24. Okay. Kind of a thin face, a little mustache. Lower left, Charles Nibley in his first suit of clothes. The material was woven by his mother. Imagine that. Lower right, President Nibley plays a good game of golf, which I imagine he made himself back in the day. I'm really sorry that he had to start from such a rough background. I do not think that poverty has any advantages. It really makes me mad. To go back to the beginning, President Nibley was born near Edinburgh, Scotland, February 5th, 1849. 1849. So in this year, it was 1931, he was in his 80s, yes? His father, James Nibley, a coal miner, was a quiet, God-fearing, inoffensive man with many sterling qualities, and a rich vein of dry Scotch wit, keen and incisive. That is where the president gets his engaging and delightful humor. His mother, Jean Wilson Nibley, was all energy and push and seemed never to tire of working and scheming to get on in the world. Withal, she had pure Scotch thrift and prudence, and she could save a little money where most people would starve. She was of a religious temperament with a deep vein of spirituality. That's a really weird thing to say, I'm not going to lie. She could save a little money where most people would starve. So did she starve? Is that what you're trying to say? Or was she good at finding other ways to eat that didn't require money? Is that what you're trying to say? I don't understand why you would say that. A very thrifty person, I guess, but is that a good thing? I don't know. I mean, obviously it was because they had nothing, but I don't know. It frustrates me, that's all. Life was a serious thing with her, an almost desperate thing in which she had no time for levity or play. Yeah, but only for work and prayers and religious activity. It sounds like she was stressed out. Yeah, but for sagacity and thrift, my mother was the savior of the family. It was a stern, hard life they had to live, one of unremitting toil and penury, but they struggled on, never faltering, and made the best of it. Did they, though? It sounds like the mother was just constantly stressed out. Poor thing. When asked how he made his first dollar, he did not say, but related this circumstance. I must have been 4 or 5 years of age when that happened. I visited my Aunt Snedden, who gave me a penny. On my way home from this visit, I met what the Scotchmen call a packman, that is a peddler, selling pins, needles, trinkets of one kind or another, and a little candy, carrying his whole store on his back. I held up my penny to the packman, who threw his pack at once on the ground, opened it up, and asked me if I wanted rock, which meant hard candy. I answered with sufficient denial, "No, I am no wantin' rock. I want pins and needles for my mother." I took the pins and needles to my mother, told her my story with all the pride in the world. I can recollect how she picked me up with tears in her eyes, rejoicing, I suppose, at my self-denial, and cried, "Ay, my bonny bairn." That's not your first dollar, though. That's your first money. Well, the value of money certainly changed, hasn't it? The family came to America in 1855. Steerage passage on a sailing vessel, a voyage requiring 6 weeks. They settled first in Rhode Island, where some of Mrs. Nibley's relatives lived, and for 5 years most of them worked in the cotton mills. During this time they saved sufficient money to fit themselves out for their journey to Utah. They went by rail to Florence, Nebraska, where they purchased a new wagon, 2 yoke of oxen, and 2 cows. They left Florence on June 17, 1860, and were little less than 3 months making the journey to Salt Lake City. President Nibley, then a boy of 11, walked barefoot most of the way. There is a suggestion of thrift in this incident. After the cows were milked in the morning, the milk not used was put in a tin churn, and strapped on the side of the wagon, and by noon it would be thoroughly churned. The butter could be gathered, and the buttermilk had for lunch. Well, that's pretty clever. I mean, it's going to be rocky, rough rides. You might as well churn butter while you're doing it, yeah? See? Think smarter, not harder. Their arrival in the valley is described as follows. On Monday, September 3, 1860, we came out of the canyon on the bench near Fort Douglas, and I can very well remember with what joy we looked upon the little growing city in the wilderness. We felt that all our troubles and trials were at an end, when, as a matter of fact, they had just begun. Oh, gosh, imagine coming to a new country and, being so full of hope that everything's going to be fine now, and then it just gets worse. Immigrating sucks, let me just say that. It has a lot of really difficult aspects to it. On arriving, they encamped on 8th Ward Square, and very soon thereafter moved to Wellsville, Cache Valley, and were among the earliest settlers. During the fall, he gleaned wheat barefoot with his mother. Oh, gosh, because they had nothing. Oh, my gosh. They would carry home on their backs the bundles of wheat which they had gleaned, and then scrub it out on a washboard. To get a half a bushel of wheat in that way was a good day's work for both of them. The other members of the family were busy getting logs, building shelter for their cattle, and a dugout in which to live. This dugout was their first home in Utah. It was one room, 12 by 16 feet, consisting of an excavation of about 3 feet, with logs laid up for another 3 feet. Okay, so they dug down 3 feet, and then built up 3 feet to make it 6 feet total. So it was a dugout. Those tended to be it's really good insulation in the winter, which allows it to retain the heat of the earth, and keeps them from needing as much wood to burn. Yeah, that's what I understood that was the advantage of dugouts. So it is continued on page 92. There it is. Okay, so it looks like we're nowhere near done, but that's okay. I'm not done knowing about this person, so... Making it about 6 feet to the square. It had no windows, and a part of a quilt served as the door. I bet it was flippin' dark in there. The chimney built by his father was of cobblestone and mud. Referring to it, President Nibley said, "That chimney never knew enough to draw the smoke up, but spewed it out and filled the room." Oh, gosh. He clearly didn't know what he was doing making a chimney. Oh, my gosh. Quoting again, he says, "My dear old mother has stated on many occasions that no queen who ever entered her palace was ever happier or prouder of shelter and the blessings of the Lord than she was when she entered the completed dugout." Oh, gosh. Because they'd been living on nothing for so long. All you can do is be grateful for this tiny little thing you have. Speaking of that first winter, he says that winter everybody in Wellsville had the itch. Of course, we were included in the number. There were no vegetables except potatoes. There were no lemons or acids to counteract the acid in the blood, so it broke out in hives or itch. Oh, gosh. So they're kind of dealing with scurvy, it sounds like. Old Davy Moffat, who crossed the plains in the handcart company the same summer that we came, left his home in Salt Lake, and somehow or other landed in Wellsville, as he had no work to do, merely came up to visit us. We entertained him, of course, the best we could in our dugout. Fancy entertaining anybody in a place like that. And we did not have any Christmas present to give him. We did manage to give him the itch. He went home after a short visit, and a little later Johnny McCarty was making a trip to Salt Lake for something or other, and I begged the privilege of going with him and seeing if I could not get work. Yeah. We got to Salt Lake in due time, and I went down and stayed at Moffat's down on 3rd Ward. I remember going to Walker Brothers' store and asking one of the Walker brothers if they would not hire a boy to help do chores or help do clerking in the store, but they said that they were not in need of any just at that time. At Moffat's in the evening, old Davy would be scratching his back, and I remember very well his saying to me, "Mom, when you gang hame, tell your father." Okay, okay. Sorry, I didn't realize this was in, dialect here. "Man, when you gang home, tell your father," and this while he was scratching away at his back, "tell your father to send me down to Muckle Hawthorne Stick." I think it's so weird when they try to write in dialect. It's so funny. 2 long and dreary winters were spent in the dugout. It was a scramble of the severest kind for a mere existence. To begin at the very beginning and make the earth produce their food and shelter was severe experience through which many pioneers passed. As a boy, he did anything and everything he could get to do. For 2 seasons, he herded sheep on the Wellsville hills. Note the significance of what follows. One is led to exclaim, "How did it happen?" I borrowed from one of the Mitten boys a book of Shakespeare plays, the first I had ever seen, and although I had never been in the theater, had never seen a play performed, yet I took so to those plays of Shakespeare that I read and reread them and committed many passages to memory, which I can bring forward even to this day. Okay, so he was interested in literature. I imagine if he had had the opportunity of having more education that he would have studied literature, yeah? Continuing, he says, that summer I got a hold of a copy of Burns' poems and would carry it with me as I was driving my sheep about, and I committed many of those poems to memory. Bob Baxter, who was with me some of the time this summer, is wont to tell, even to this day, that while he was fooling away his time playing, I was studying Burns' poems and reading every other book that I could get hold of. Burns has been my favorite from that day to this. It was easy for me to talk Scotch, and I always did enjoy it all thoroughly. Talk Scotch, huh? And then there's this picture, which I think is a little bit strange, but okay, because so far they haven't mentioned any Native Americans at all, but okay. Thus he became familiar with Shakespeare, Burns, and the Bible, 3 great masterpieces of literature. These were his textbooks, and he knows them. He is an educated man, and he got a precious part of it alone, herding sheep on the hills of Wellsville. Is there any boy too poor to go to such a school? One of the secrets of his great achievements is revealed here. We have in this boy, left to his own resources, alone herding sheep, a prophecy of the man. We fancy that he read often and treasured these lines from the great Scotch poet, took them to heart and followed their admonition. To catch Dame Fortune's golden smile, assiduous wait upon her, and gather gear by every wile that's justified by honor, not for to hide it in a hedge, nor for a train attendant, but for the glorious privilege of being independent. I like that. Yeah. Try to do things just so you can be independent. You don't have to rely on other people. I'm kind of an independent person, so I appreciate that. To hasten with the story, we read again from his writings. Early in the month of December 1907, President Smith sent for me to come to the President's office. He said to me, "Charlie, the Church of the Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints needs a presiding bishop, and you have been chosen for that place." Of course it was a surprise to me. Oh, did that come out of the blue? Interesting. I had never dreamed of acting in that office, but I was glad to even anxious to do anything I could to assist President Smith in his admonition of the church affairs, and I told him so. He took me in his arms and kissed me and wept tears of joy as he embraced me and blessed me, as he only can do. Well, I understood that Joseph F. Smith was quite an affectionate person, that he liked to hug and kiss people, so I don't think that that's that strange, but that it came out of the blue, there must have been something leading up to that. They did mention that they were friends, and had been for many years, so did he just randomly choose his friend, or did Charles W. Nibley have other callings before that kind of led him up to it? I don't know. They didn't mention it. The new bishop was 58 years of age and in the prime of life. Would you call 58 the prime of life? I think what they mean was that he was very healthy, which is good, but I don't know that I would call 58 the prime of life. It's kind of, the beginning of the sunset of your life, yeah? Like, it's not... Prime of life, I would say, was like 30 to 50, but I wouldn't say 58. That's a little bit late in life to be prime. I don't know. I'm just saying. I know what they mean, though. They're saying to say that he was healthy and strong at the time. He wasn't in any sort of health issues or anything like that, which is good. Yeah, healthy is good. He brought to this calling the strength and devotion of his great heart and the accumulated wisdom of a large and varied experience. He was an executive of recognized and transcendent ability, and with his accustomed zeal undertook the arduous work of his office. Arduous work, okay. The entire temporal structure of the church felt the vitalizing touch of a master hand, and results were soon manifest. During the 18 years which he served as presiding bishop, the church made remarkable progress spiritually and financially. He was a factor in it. In 1918, President Joseph F. Smith passed away, and in 1925, President Nibley became counselor to President Heber J. Grant. Referring to the death of President Smith, he says, October 19, 1918, My dearest and best friend, my most valuable and precious brother, President Joseph F. Smith, passed from this sphere to his reward in the life beyond. This brought to the greatest sorrow into my life, for to me he was my ideal. If I could only be assured that I would be worthy to associate with him in the hereafter, I would be happy indeed. That's really sweet. Well, he was clearly very close to him. In a tribute which was published at the time in the Improvement era, he says, "No heart ever beat truer to every principle of manhood and righteousness and justice and mercy than his. That great heart, encased in his magnificent frame, made him the biggest, the broadest, the tenderest, the purest of all men who walked the earth in his time." Charles W. Nibley was hardly 17 when the Civil War ended. Why are we jumping backwards? Okay, apparently we're jumping backwards. The construction of the great transcontinental railroad was soon underway. Money was plentiful, times were prosperous, and he was ready when the opportunity came. At an early age, he began in a small way to accumulate some means and to discover himself. At 20, he was married. At 40, he had accumulated a fortune. At 60, he was presiding bishop of the church. At 76, a member of the First Presidency, a man distinguished for wisdom and the soundness of splendor of his character. His diversified interests and absorbing responsibilities in the great world of affairs in which he moved never submerged nor dimmed his interest in the church, nor engrossed his time. To the exclusion of better things, his life is built upon an ampler scale than his fortune. In fact, during his very busiest years, he filled 2 missions. He and his 9 sons, have spent more than 20 years preaching the gospel as missionaries. He was not only given generously of his substance to the church, but he has given liberally of his time and his great ability. It is doubtful if, in the aggregate, any man in all the history of this church has paid more in dollars and cents into its treasury, and the men are indeed few who have actually given more in time in its service. He has 17 living children. Okay, that explains the 9 sons, yeah. 51 grandchildren and 3 great-grandchildren, and his family is the pride of his heart. President Charles W. Nibley has read widely and prudently. He has a discriminating, luminous, and absorbent mind. He possesses the rare capacity to analyze quickly any problem, no matter how intricate or complex. Clear and decisive in his conclusions, established and unwavering in his faith, he stands on the summit of 82 years a staunch and patriotic American, a kind husband, a devoted father, a wise and congenial counselor, a courageous, God-fearing, and benevolent leader of men. Well, that was quite thorough. I really enjoyed that. I hope that you did too. I will do a little bit of fact-checking on Wikipedia. Once again, I will reiterate, I look at Wikipedia to fact-check because I am not writing a book. This is a YouTube video, in case you weren't sure about that. Anyways, so I don't have a problem with fact-checking on Wikipedia for a YouTube video. Yes? Anyway. Alright, it's a little bit long, but it's not like the end of the world long, so I'm just going to read most of it probably. I might skip a little bit, but alright. Charles Wilson Nibley, February 5, 1849 to December 11, 1931, was a Scottish-American religious leader, businessman, and politician. Nibley was a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints and served as the 5th presiding bishop of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, LDS Church, between 1907 and 1925. That's a little bit repetitive, but that's okay. And a member of the church's first presidency from 1925 until his death. He was also a businessman and was involved in various industries such as lumber, sugar, and railroads. Early life. Nibley was born in Hunterfield, Midlothian, Scotland, to James Nibley and Jean Wilson. In 1855, his family moved to the United States to join the main body of the Latter-day Saints. They spent some time living in Rhode Island. In 1860, they moved to the Utah Territory. The family was sent north to settle in Cache Valley and eventually settled in Wellsville. In Wellsville, Nibley worked as a sheep herder and a store clerk. As an adult, Nibley moved to Brigham City, Utah, where he worked for Morris Rosenbaum, a Jewish convert to Mormonism, and later became a partner in the store where he worked. Why did they mention that Morris Rosenbaum was a Jewish convert? I think that's a little weird. Like, who cares? You know what I mean? It was there he met Rebecca Neibauer, who was the sister of one of Rosenbaum's wives, and was married in 1869. Following the 19th century practice of plural marriage, Nibley married Ellen Ricks in 1880 and Julia Budge in 1885. Yeah, that wasn't unusual at the time. I'm not going to pass judgment on that. I'm pretty sure that most people did at the time. Well, not most, but many people. In 1879 to 1885, Nibley managed a lumber company that was part of the LDS Church's United Order program. He then joined with David Eccles and George Stoddard to form the Oregon Lumber Company in 1889. As one of Nibley's grandsons, Hugh Nibley, related. Oh, I didn't know they were related. Yeah, it does make sense, doesn't it? Okay. Charles Nibley used economic tricks, including manipulating the Homestead Act to acquire large swaths of land, and then would pay off government agents who investigated. Oh, that's okay. That's a little shady. I'm not gonna lie. I didn't know he did like shady business practices. Jeez. Nibley was a firm believer in monopolies, believing competition was economic waste. Okay, don't give him any political power, okay? He also believed that LDS church members who didn't support paying higher prices to Mormon businesses versus lower prices to non-Mormon businesses were betraying the church. This attitude of loyalty was also supported by Heber J. Grant in the October 1919 General Conference. Why did they mention that? Okay. Nibley also became involved in railroads, insurance, banking, politics. Not politics! Don't make him okay, don't give him any political power. And major agricultural endeavors, eventually becoming a multimillionaire. Huh. The sugar beet growing town of Nibley, Oregon was named for him. Really? He was later instrumental in forming the Amalgamated Sugar Company and the Utah and Idaho Sugar Company, later known as U&I Sugar. He was chairman of the executive committee of Utah-Idaho Sugar Company, president of the Standard Investors, Inc., comprising all of the Nibley holdings, and a valued director of the following business institutions: Zion's Cooperative Mercantile Institution, also known as ZCMI, Utah State National Bank, Zion Savings Bank and Trust, Utah Power and Light Company, Western Pacific Railroad Company, Hotel Utah, that's a new one, Utah Lime and Stone Company, also a new one, Mountain States Telephone and Telegraph Company, and Beneficial Life Insurance Company. See, many of these were listed on basically all of the general authorities we've looked at, except for the last few, like starting at Hotel Utah and after. But all the earlier ones, ZCMI, Utah State National Bank, Zion Savings Bank and Trust, Utah Power and Light Company, Western Pacific Railroad, like those are ones that basically everybody invested in. So I'm not that surprised, but like, interesting. Like he seems, okay. Interesting. I didn't know he became a multimillionaire. Like this is kind of, they did say he was financially successful, but I don't know. Like, can you become a millionaire without stepping on some toes? Is it even possible? Just throwing it out there. I'll bet he had a few enemies. I'm just saying. I don't know to what extent, but I don't know. Those shady business practices, he was paying bribes and stuff, that's weird. Like, do not let him work in politics. Please don't. Church service. Missions. Nibley served 2 missions for the LDS Church. His first mission, oh, they didn't mention that in the article, from October 1869 to March 1870, was to the eastern United States and was primarily a goodwill mission, trying to counteract the negative press surrounding polygamy in Utah. Okay, his second mission from May 1877 to May 1879 was to England, and proved to be influential to later church history. I wonder why. He traveled with new mission president Joseph F. Smith, and while serving in England became good friends with the future church president. Well, that's not where the article said that they met. They said they met in Utah. Well, maybe they had already met, yeah? Maybe they just weren't friends yet until they worked together in the mission field. I guess that's possible. He was around 30 at the time. Stake Presidency. After Nibley had moved to Oregon to participate in the lumber business, an LDS stake was organized in the area, and Nibley was called as the first counselor in the Stake Presidency. Okay. See, they didn't even mention that before. He served from June 1901 to December 1907. Okay. That makes sense. That would also make a little more sense how he came to the attention of the first presidency, being friends with the president of the church, and also one of the stake presidents who was, one of the people known to the general authorities. Interesting. Presiding Bishop. Nibley was called as the presiding bishop of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints in December 1907 by Joseph F. Smith, with whom he had served in England a few decades earlier. It was during Nibley's term as presiding bishop that the LDS Church built the Hotel Utah. Okay, that makes sense why he was invested in it then. Yeah, Charles W. Nibley was one of the most liberal industrialists of his time, but he had to compromise. Thus, to finish the Hotel Utah, it was necessary to borrow $2 million. That's a lot. So President Smith sent Brother Nibley to Barney Baruch in New York to raise the money. He succeeded, and President Smith was delighted, but he was also alarmed when he heard the terms. It would all have to be paid back in 2 years. Charlie, what have you done? How in the world will we ever pay it back in that time? Not to worry, they would have the whole thing paid off in 2 years. How? I'm going to build the largest and finest bar in the West in the basement of the hotel, and we'll see that we pay off every penny of that debt. President Smith went through the ceiling. Which was it to be? The word of wisdom or fiscal soundness? The dollar won. Wow! Interesting. Oh my gosh. Like, that's raising some eyebrows. Oh my gosh. Now, to be honest, like, paying off a loan of $2 million within 2 years, like, that's asking a lot. But doing it by selling alcohol. Like, he did have some shady business practices, didn't he? I kind of saw it coming, but it was like, wow. And then this is the person who was presiding bishop at the time. Oh dear. I understand now why Heber J. Grant had such a strong emphasis on the word of wisdom. He's like, no, we're not doing that. Like, and so when he was president of the church, he was like, no. The first presidency. In 1925, he was released as presiding bishop and was asked to be second counselor to Heber J. Grant in church's first presidency. He is one of the few individuals to serve in the first presidency without having been ordained to the priesthood office of apostle. That is true. But we mentioned that in the article on John R. Winder. Yeah, that is, there is a handful of them. Like, I could list off a couple, like a good handful of them. Also, most of them were under Brigham Young. But, yeah, there were a few others as well, obviously, including Charles W. Nibley. Yeah, so if you're curious about that, yeah, there were probably, 6 or 7 total. There weren't that many. Jedediah M. Grant and, Sidney Rigdon. There were a few. John W. Young, Daniel H. Wells, people like that. Also, John R. Winder, and apparently Charles W. Nibley. So, there you go. Nibley Park. In 1921, Nibley bought Windermere Calder Park in Salt Lake City and donated it to the city on Christmas Eve of that year. That's really random. The gift to the city had the stipulation that it would never be sold and remain a golf course or be returned to the Nibley family. The idea was to provide a public golf course where the general public, both poor and rich, could enjoy the game of golf. Well, that's kind of cool. At the dedication on May 22, 1922, Nibley said, "When I think that this generation and the generations of men and women yet to come shall find healthful enjoyment and rare pleasure here in playing that splendid outdoor Scotch game known as golf, and also in other outdoor amusements which shall not interfere with golf, that thought gives me the highest satisfaction and most genuine pleasure." Well, that's cool. I hope it's still a golf course, yeah? Death and legacy. Nibley died of pneumonia in Salt Lake City, Utah. He was buried in Logan City Cemetery. Nibley, Utah, is named after him. Charles's son Preston became a church leader and author of several Mormon books. Preston Nibley, yeah. Hugh W. Nibley, a Mormon apologist and academic, is Charles's grandson and through his son Alexander. Musician Reed Nibley was a grandson, and Martha Nibley Beck is a great-granddaughter. Interesting that they say musician Reed Nibley was a grandson. I'm guessing he's dead. Is why they worded it like that, but shouldn't they say is a grandson? I'm just saying. Martha Nibley Beck is a great-granddaughter. I don't know that woman, Martha Nibley Beck. I don't know Reed Nibley either, but I'm assuming that they are relatively well known in other circles, so I apologize for not knowing them. If you know them, leave a comment. Correct me, tell me where they're from. I found that very interesting, but I have this niggling feeling like this guy isn't fully honest. And I feel like if he had been, he couldn't have become a multimillionaire. And they made it clear that he was paying bribes in order to help make his money. Yeah, that's not great. And then paying off a debt by opening a bar, you know, it's a little shady. It's a little shady. Let's support alcoholism. Yes, especially considering the church itself was very against alcohol. I wonder if he himself drank alcohol. I mean, he didn't say, but it's a possibility. I don't know. I don't know. It just seems a little strange to me. Yeah. I found the article by Bryant Hinckley a little bit like more optimistic. Like, let's skip over some of his faults and just, talk about his virtues. But this one didn't. Yeah, that's for sure. So he was very fiscally aware, I think is kind of like the conclusion I would come to, but had some shady business practices, and that's a little bit sad. I feel like this was kind of the era of shady business practices. Another person I felt who was a little bit on the shady business practicey side was Reed Smoot, so go ahead and read his article or watch his video if you want to, if you're interested. But I don't know, it just seems really strange to me that all of these people just it was the era of shady business practices. It really was. It was like, hey, we don't have any money, we need to find some money, who can make us money, and then let's point to the people who can make money really well. Well, how are they doing it is the question. I don't know. It's a little bit frustrating to me, but it's still very fascinating how he ended up where he was. But, anyways, I really enjoyed the article. I have to say that was a really good article. I'm a little disappointed in the morals of the person themselves. That's all. Anyways, but I hope you enjoyed the video anyway, and if you did, please give it a like and subscribe to the channel, and I hope to see you in the next video.